Today we'll explore an important question. If security is everyone's job, then where should the information that supports that job go? I'm Stephen Kuenzli, founder of K9 Security. K9 makes AWS IAM usable for cloud teams. And here to explore that question with me is Andrew Askins, founder of Krit. Andrew is a designer who specializes in creating great cybersecurity products. This discussion will go past "it depends" and give you some questions to help you meet users where they are and available in the form they want, whether that's a GUI, CLI, API, or raw data. Now on to the discussion.
All right. Hey, Stephen.
Hey Andrew, how are you today?
Doing well. So you had a product question you wanted to muse on. Is that a word?
Yeah, sure. We can muse, we can debate slash explore. So
Cool.
my question is, uh, what do you think about putting high value information, security information, or any other the point is it's high value. What do you think about putting that high value information into UIs that people are already using instead of building another UI?
Yeah. Can you elaborate a little bit on the high value piece? Because I wonder if that's
Yeah.
part of the equation here.
Yeah. So I think something that drives my thought is if we say that security is everyone's job, shouldn't we put security information in the places that people do their job?
Mhm.
So maybe that's a dashboard in Datadog or Splunk. It's like work tracking in Jira or some other whatever issue tracker they're already using, as opposed to creating like an alternate place and alternate workflows and experience for surfacing important information, reviewing important information.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's the question.
So in general, I think that this is mostly a good idea. I think it's generally good to meet your customers where they are, whatever that looks like. And the easiest example for me to talk through is one of our best known clients that we have been working with for 3 years now, which is the company Gray Noise. Um, so Gray Noise is a company that essentially collects valuable security data. Specifically, they collect data on who is mass scanning the internet. They have a
Mm-hmm.
wide sensor of nodes, and if all those nodes are seeing something at the same time, then they can say with a reasonable amount of certainty that this group of IPs or whatever it is sort of scanning the entire internet and not just targeting a specific node. Um,
Sure.
and so with that information, they can then do a lot of helpful things like tell you kind of what traffic to ignore, while also kind of seeing the next wave of attacks when new vulnerabilities come out. So there's all sorts of interesting things, and they're constantly like finding new ways to explore that data. And they took a strategy that I think a lot of security companies should take if they aren't already, of meeting people where they are first. But then they also developed their own UI, and the two things had different purposes. So um, before Grey Noise had much of the UI at all, they started with a CLI, which is a little different because it's not necessarily putting data into someone else's product per se, but it is putting data into a tool that people are already using. It's making it easy for people to come in. You are developing your own interface. The CLI is by definition an interface, um, but it's a kind of a quick and easy interface
Yeah.
in a place where people are already spending all of their time.
Right.
Um, so they built a CLI, and then they built pretty quickly opened up the API that was powering that CLI, and let people pull that API in and hook it into Splunk or whatever they were using internally. Um, then once they saw that the thing they were doing was creating value for people, they expanded on that. They started adding degrees of access, and eventually built a UI as well, And I think the value of having their own UI is that in some ways it's easier for people to come in and experience your UI than it is like if you're already a security analyst who's working all day in Splunk and your organization can quickly approve adding, gray noise, and you can kind of get in, get it, then maybe it's easier for you to use gray noise on a day-to-day basis with the API. But for a lot of people, it's easier to test it by going to gray noise's interface first. Whether that was originally sort of downloading the CLI and like running a couple commands, or going to a web address and just punching in a couple of IPs. And so there's like a lower friction to some degree. It's tough, right? It can sometimes be lower friction if you're depending on how your interface is built. Sometimes it can be higher friction.
Right. And I think this is, so this is the part I've been noodling on.
Mm-hmm.
Like for casual or non-expert use,
mm-hmm.
it feels like supporting a workflow in a tool like Datadog or Splunk, and like Splunk in particular, you can has the marketplace, and you can like
mm-hmm.
build these apps, and so you can actually get pretty far down the path of like good UX.
Mm-hmm.
But it's maybe not for expert level use,
mm-hmm.
right? And like it's like, well, yeah, it's a it's a general purpose tool.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's not custom built UI, right? So of course, like there's going to be a trade-off in the balance. And I think it's important to understand the question for me then becomes like, well, who is the user?
Mm-hmm.
And are you building the experience for non-experts, or are you building it for experts?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's an interesting question in a lot of spaces, but particularly security spaces, where I can see, where some UIs, are built specifically or might be built specifically to nail the experience of a decision maker, or, like a power user who's then going to advocate, be like a champion, but not necessarily the non-experts who actually have to scale the practice.
Mm-hmm.
So, this is actually where, like, from my own perspective, I'm really thinking about putting the information into the more general purpose tools, because we're specifically building for non-experts to be able mm-hmm. to be effective in executing, a security workflows for AWS IAM. But it's like it may not demo as well, like
yeah,
right. But on the inside of big corp or medium corp or even small corp, like, well, lots of folks spend their days like in front of dashboards and building. I certainly did.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say it wouldn't demo as well, because that's real. Sometimes you need to have sort of something of your own that you can demo so that to help people get it. Whereas saying, hey, pull up the Splunk marketplace and like install this application and everything might be a tougher demo. I'm not sure. Or it might not be as compelling a demo.
Yeah, it may or may not, like, because it may recognize like, oh, like it's just Splunk, and like I know the query language, and like, oh, that's great, like, but yeah. So I think this is an interesting question, and so far we've kind of spoke, or at least part of this is like, well, it's one thing to surface information and like mm-hmm. help people understand something, but then like creating workflow is like the next step in acting upon it. And I think that's a challenge. To like
a challenge when you're in someone else's interface, you mean?
Yeah. It is going to be a challenge, like you might be able to like sort of
Mhm.
kick off some workflow, but like you're probably going to lose track of the status of that thing almost immediately.
Yeah, you do. You have less control, certainly, over the end-to-end experience, and you have less control over the full workflow. So, getting back to what does the user need, and what are they really hoping to get out of this? You know, for some users, they don't want to have to learn a new workflow. Learning a new workflow is going to be kind of a negative that's going to make it harder to sell your product,
Right.
because that's just another, they've got to now open a new tab. They've got to, you know, download a new product. They've got to, whatever it is. There's, sometimes that can be a hindrance, but sometimes, it can be an advantage. And again, I think if you're thinking workflows, that's probably where that expert versus beginner question maybe comes into play, because, for the expert user, maybe they're getting enough value for it to be worth learning a new workflow because now they have the control to do something else. Whereas if
Right.
they have to just sort of shove this into their existing workflow,
Yeah.
but then on the flip side, right, like gray noise, the expert users are the ones who are using the product in other tools, really, because they're getting API access and then tying that API into sometimes custom built tools,
Right.
sometimes not even like off the shelf products, but their own custom tooling, to sort of be a first layer of defense and kind of eliminate a bunch of alerts. And so sometimes the expert user is going to want to get into your custom workflow, and sometimes the expert user is going to be so expert they have their own custom workflow that they want to figure out how to integrate your tool into and pull it into. So it's not just asking, I think, expert or beginner. That's part of the question, but then it's like, what is the context of that
Yeah.
expert or beginner, and what's the context of our tool and what it does. um, yeah, it's complicated.
So how would you go about exploring that, like, and figuring out which sort of solutions you might explore, or of course then ultimately commit to building?
um yeah, so what's, you know let's ground this in an example. You know where are we starting from, um
Hmm.
when we're asking this question and
Say you
starting to
have a
explore?
lot of, yeah, say you have a lot of, I mean, not a lot, but like you have valuable information, but what you feel like is happening is it's not getting to the right people and they're not able to engage with it. And imagine you're, at least in my case, like I'm interested in building for non-experts, right?
Mhm.
Um, but what would be your thought process on, and we don't necessarily need to go through mine, but like what would be your thought process, like what questions would you ask to figure out like what does a decision tree look like?
Okay, so I know that I have useful information. I know that that useful information isn't necessarily getting into the hands of the right people today. Do I already have an interface built, um, that I'm trying to figure out how much more time to invest in, or am I starting greenfield? Am I
So,
starting from
like say
scratch?
like say you're already delivering data in some sort of like CSVs, or flat files, and really the way I think about it is like how do we engage the
Mm-hmm.
right customers, and so like you know putting the information in the right place is a huge part of fostering engagement and building the right UX.
Yeah. So where my mind goes, and tell me if this is kind of where you're thinking, or if I'm sort of going down a rabbit hole, but where my mind immediately goes is, again, back to context.
Mhm.
So what I want to do is I want to, you know hopefully I've got an idea of kind of the users I want to serve,
Mhm.
and who this information is going to be most helpful for. And then I want to learn as much as I can about their day to day, and their challenges. And so asking things like, what tools are you using already?
Mhm.
Um, and, what tools are you how much time are you spending in each of those? Um, you know, like if I'm serving engineers, right? Or I would be really curious to know, are you using an IDE and a terminal? Are you using an IDE that has a bunch of plug-in components? Like, are you someone who is trying to stay in one space, or are you someone who's kind of wants a custom experience and so is jumping around from thing to thing to thing? So kind of what are you using now? And that's, have you ever read the mom test?
Yes. Yes.
I figured you would have.
Yeah.
But
Let's go with the 5 questions for those
yeah,
who
like
haven't.
the mom test is, to me, the core principle of the mom test. So the whole idea is like, how can you design questions for users that even if you're asking your mom, she won't lie to you, because your mom likes you so much that she's always going to tell you your idea is great and you're great and everything's perfect. But how do you design something that like people can't accidentally lie to you? And to me, the core principle of the mom test is like rooting everything in like, what are people currently doing, or what have people done in the past? And so the more you can understand that user behavior as it is today, right, or as it has been in the past, the more I can start to understand. um so
Right. So tell me what tools you use today or last week, not
mhm.
tell me where you'd like to see this information.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
um
speculative.
Yeah, like, have you ever opened the Splunk marketplace? Like, do you know that the Splunk marketplace exists? Because if no one has touched the Splunk marketplace, if my users, I talked to 5 of them and none of them have ever even been to the Splunk marketplace, then that's kind of a lost cause. But maybe I find out that really they're downloading a bunch of open source tools and stringing those together in their CLI using a couple of scripts. Um, and so it's like, hey, I really just need a really good CLI more than I need. I need a way for them to, combine commands, um, and sort of pull in my information. Um, so yeah, getting at the context of, and getting at the pain points that people are feeling, like where are they spending the most time? If someone's really just like, I have no time, I have no time to pick something up, then getting them into a new interface might be a tough sell.
Mm.
If someone says like, I've like, you know I've got time to solve this problem, I know I need to solve this problem, I've got to figure it out, I've been trying a bunch of things and nothing, like I've been burning time on it already and nothing's working, then it's like, okay, maybe we can pull them over here.
Sure.
I feel like I'm going down I'm kind of going all over the place here, but
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you hit on some great stuff in that, like, you gotta go talk to people and see where they're spending their time already. What solutions have they already tried? What don't they like about those existing solutions? And if they say like, yeah, like I strung together all these little tools, but I actually had to write a whole bunch of glue code to transform data in between them. And so really what I
mm-hmm.
want is like something that just tells me this. And like, maybe the right answer is a CLI that does that,
Mm-hmm.
or something else, right? But it does, it's critical to understand where people are spending their time and how they want to work.
Mm-hmm.
So someone who has spent a bunch of time like trying to like string together a solution, like they probably want to do something similar in the future, unless they just tell you like, oh, we don't want that. We want a product, we want a service, we want a team to like just send us the good information via email or whatever. But yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
I think you also have to ask a little bit, if we're talking about building a business here, we have to ask a little bit about the pros and cons, like the risks of putting our information, our data into someone else's hands. We've talked a little bit about the lack of control that you get. The some of the pros that you get potentially distribution.
Mm-hmm.
If some of these marketplaces, Like people have built great businesses off of, the Shopify marketplace, off of, Facebook marketplace back in the day. And, um, there's like a big IT tool. ServiceNow has like this massive marketplace, and there's some huge plugins that people have used ServiceNow as like a distribution platform. So that's a pro, but then the con is you do inherit some platform risk, right? Like if you go all in on a platform and being somewhere else, then you risk not only losing the control that we were talking about earlier when trying to create the best experience for your customer, you also run some business risk of, that platform, if it's driving most of your revenue, most of your growth, and it decides, the marketplace is no longer a priority for them, it shuts that down. That is a risk to consider. Um, and you also, I think, inherit a little bit of like brand risk, almost, of like, you don't get to, someone might not see your tool as, equal to a Splunk. They might not see your brand as equal to Splunk. They might just think of you as like kind of part of Splunk. And so you're helping build Splunk's brand equity instead of your own, which for a lot of like indie makers isn't really a big deal, right? Like we don't need to build a massive business. And so, getting, it's no big deal if Splunk gets the credit, so to speak. But if you're trying to build a really big business that's going to compete with somebody like a Splunk or a ServiceNow, you potentially run a little bit of risk and kind of losing some of that brand equity potentially. I don't know if you agree with that or not.
Yeah, well, definitely. I've thought through some of this stuff, particularly in the example that you brought up with Splunk. They have, I want to say something like 200,000 apps in
Wow.
their marketplace. Like it's enormous,
Mm-hmm.
and you can tell that, or so I've looked into a little bit, but like you can tell that they've really put a lot of effort into the ability for people to build apps that run on Splunk, and they're pretty unique, at least given the last time I checked, like probably 6-9 months ago,
Mm-hmm.
amongst like the I'll call it like logs collection system, data analysis systems. Like they're far ahead in that respect. So like, if you're going to pick one, number one, that's probably a better platform to build on. Number two, given Splunk pricing, you may say like, oh, you know what? Like the people who are deploying Splunk, they're not afraid of spending money on a solution. And
Yeah,
like
that's super interesting.
that's good.
That's kind of like the
Right?
old school. I'm sure it's changed by now, but the old school Android and iOS days when like the two platforms were really new, you could build stuff for Android, but if you wanted to make money, you had to build for iOS because the
Right.
iPhone users were the ones shelling out money for apps.
Yeah, and actually,
Um,
I was just thinking about a similar parallel between like web and native app development, and
mhm.
and you know, back in the day, I helped build a bunch of stuff for Flex, because like that was the only platform where we could create the right experience for that application. Like, this was 2009, 2010.
Mhm.
Um, and we essentially built Photoshop for regular people in the browsers to create photo books, and like, you know the level of experience that we were trying to get, it wasn't really possible uh, in other technologies.
Mhm.
And then the world has changed a bit since then, but that if you're really trying, and I think this actually coming back, like if you're really trying to push UX, um, then yeah, you probably need that native solution. If you are, if your number one priority is making, the information visible, um, and then you basically trigger actions that integrate into other systems.
Mhm.
And you're not trying to build an immersive workflow in someone else's platform, which of course is going to be expensive. Um, Especially since you need to build it for end platforms that you support. If you think about just getting it, broadening your distribution, then maybe, getting into other people's UIs and other people's, single panes of glass is the way to go, right?
Yeah. I was gonna bring up that phrase. I was wondering how long it would take us to get to single pane of glass. And I think, you know, as if we want to zoom out of the context, if we want to say sort of context independent, what are some things that seem to be true about the security industry in particular? One seems to be that tool fatigue is becoming more and more real. Um, and you got to look not just at what are your customers doing today, and what value can you offer, and how can you best deliver that value to them, which is the most important question. But then another one of these ancillary questions is, what are your competitors doing? And
Yeah.
I don't ever preach paying too much attention to your competitors, but when everybody is saying we're the single pane of glass, it can sometimes be a good idea to go in the opposite direction and say, don't worry about that. You don't have to add another pane of glass. We're not going to be yet another thing you have to log into. We'll just integrate with whatever you got. It's fine. We're happy to just come in. Don't worry. You're not going to have to learn a new tool. You're not going to have to, open a new tab. You're not going to have to do all these additional things. We're already where you are. And that is one of the biggest value props of taking this approach.
Right. And so strategically, K9 has actually zagged, and we are focused on being open and enabling integration with the tools you already have.
Nice.
And integrate with your existing workflows. One of the fascinating things, having investigated probably 10 security market tools, to see where we could integrate with, I was surprised to find that probably less than a quarter have any real APIs to put external third-party data into those single panes of glass. And I think it's an interesting problem. As someone who's built integration systems and surfaces kind of stuff, where I appreciate the pain of
it's
trying to
hard.
provide a good model for third parties to integrate with.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, I think there's a question of how much of a single pane of glass can you be if you don't offer a way to integrate data for problems you don't solve yet.
Yeah.
So I think there's actually kind of an interesting gap in the market there potentially. I don't know. I haven't done the mom test to figure out if it's viable.
And that's not super surprising to me, because my feeling since getting into this industry a couple of years ago has been that it just kind of feels like most of the products are the wave of products are lagging maybe a year or two behind mainstream SaaS, where it's a few, because it was this big conversation in mainstream SaaS a few years ago where people were like, oh, you need to have an API, you need to open stuff up, you need to start integrating. And even the move from on-prem to SaaS happened, before that. And then once people moved to SaaS, it was okay, well, now that you have the ability to integrate, and maybe that's part of why, this lag happens a little bit, because there are good reasons for some security tools to be on-prem versus being SaaS based. And it's a lot harder to build, or impossible in some cases, to build integrations with on-prem solutions. If it's an air gapped on-prem solution, right? Then it's
I mean, I don't even think we need to go all the way to the extreme of air gap, but there's a bunch of on-prem solutions that just don't have APIs that are reasonable.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, it seems like security has kind of the security tools are kind of on the back wave
Yeah.
of SaaS innovation, SaaS kind of changes. Um, I don't know if you've experienced that as well, or if that's just me
Well,
being.
yeah, I've definitely experienced it as someone who's tried to automate things like firewall or load balancer devices on-prem. This was, the mid tens, 2010s. And just like, you're essentially sitting on top of a CLI,
Mhm.
like, and automating that. Or maybe there's a WSDL based thing. Um, had an experience with that, a secret management system, you know, that couldn't even get the binary to actually run on in a Linux container properly in 2018. It's like bizarre. Like where, like, but I think you're right with. I agree with you on the point that, like, there's a big difference between kind of the kind of APIs and the expectations for APIs that we have from cloud providers and most security tools, particularly for getting data into the system. So there's a lot of security tools. They have APIs to get data out of the system, and that's good. That's useful.
Mhm.
I suspect their customers asked for it. Um, or required it for, so they could build bespoke automation. But, if you want to get data into an audit manager, like AWS Audit Manager might be your best bet,
Mm.
right? Which is fascinating. Um, and, that the notion of API first, that future is unevenly distributed.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like I sort of took us down a little bit of a tangent there where we got away from our core question and started talking about just overall security trends. But getting back to that core question of, you know, when does it make sense to put high value information into someone else's UI versus building your UI? I think it there's all of these questions that we're asking, which are, what's
Yeah.
the platform risk? What's the additional technical debt we might accidentally inherit um, by running into some of these APIs that aren't as well documented or aren't as fully fleshed out yet as we want them to be. What are our users doing today? How are they doing things today? What are they using? Are they tired of having to learn a new interface, or are they tired of having to string a bunch of tools together? And do they want, just an easy place to go? Um, and you know what distribution advantages could we get from being somewhere else? These are all the things that I would try to consider. How important is building our brand versus are we cool with being, you know do we really need a powerful brand, or if we have that built-in distribution, are we fine? These are all the kinds of things that I think are worth considering when you're asking a question. And really, at the end of the day, what it comes down to is, can I make my users' life easier by going where they already are? Or can I make their life easier by giving them a really nice custom experience that I control and that I can influence?
I think that's a great recap. Like, so I know what I'm going to do.
um, Real quick before we wrap, do you have any examples of people who you think have done this, executed on the strategy really well?
Mm, that's a good question. Um,
I was trying to think of people in security. Um, Gray Noise is the one who I have the most experience with. There's another new email security tool called Sublime Security,
yeah.
and they have taken kind of a similar approach where they've started with like sort of a CLI and then are building kind of a supporting interface as well. One that came to mind, it's not quite the same thing, but thinking of someone who really leaned into not having their own UI for a while. One that came to mind was Grammarly.
Hmm.
Grammarly built this massive $1 billion business by being a plugin and being where people already were. You know, ideally, the only thing you see from Grammarly is like little notifications and information
Clues.
inside of your Google Doc or inside of your Gmail account or inside of your whatever, wherever you're writing. Grammarly, for those who don't know, is a tool that helps you edit as you write. Originally for grammar, and then they expanded to, more nuanced editing. And so it is totally possible to build a really powerful business. Like I've been to the Grammarly UI once, and I think it was just to upgrade my billing information. Like I
Yeah.
don't want to spend any time in Grammarly.
Right. 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 And that's actually kind of, as an engineer, like what I need to know, what I care about is the information.
Mm-hmm.
In most cases. And if you can model your information in such a way that it doesn't require like a lot of support from the UI, then I think it's a potentially a good candidate, and you can focus on distribution. And in the security space, like I think Splunk Marketplace is probably the number one place that comes to mind. A lot of our customers are also using Datadog, so working on that as
Do some of
well.
the cloud platforms have their own marketplaces as well yet? Like,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So in fact, so the thing is they have their own marketplaces. So like
mm-hmm.
AWS Marketplace is actually what K9 uses
Mm-hmm.
for subscription management and all that, but it doesn't offer a UI.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the cloud providers proper are going to be reluctant to embed applications on their own domain because it opens up all kinds of little security issues.
Sure.
But on the other hand, like, you can build browser plugins and so forth for use in your cloud, in the cloud console.
Mm-hmm.
And like, hopefully the last few weeks hasn't been too rough with all the AWS console updates for people who went that path. But like that again, like going back to that Grammarly example of like being where users are, if the engineers you're trying to help use the AWS console a lot to investigate security, then that might be a good place to be and help them out, right? That's a good point.
Yeah, cool. Well, yeah, interesting question. Anything else we should touch on today?
I think we covered it, and really enjoyed the conversation, Andrew.
Yeah, same, Stephen. Cool. Appreciate it.
All right, take care.
You too.